And welcome to the Missions Podcast, the show that explores your hard questions on missions, theology, and practice to help goers think and thinkers go. I'm Alex Kochman, Director of Communications and Media with ABWE, joined by Scott Dunford, pastor of Redeemer Church in Fremont, California. And Scott, you and I are far away, but we have some live in-person guests here today on the show who I am excited to introduce. Now, Scott, we've talked a little bit about your background as a pastor, as a missionary. You've also got kids. And I'm curious, let me ask you, how would you react in, not the spiritual Scott, the human Scott, the fleshly Scott? How would the fleshly Scott react if one of your children told you that they were going to off and become a missionary, move, never see again? Immediate blind reaction, go.
It'd be tough. I mean, I'm dealing with some of that right now. They're not missionaries, but I live in California. My daughter lives in Louisville, Kentucky, and I miss her every day. And the thought of not being able to just hop on a plane and see her quickly, the thought of not being able to talk very often because of time differences, but then even more importantly, if she's in a dangerous situation, that would be difficult. You know, like as much as I, even in my spiritual side, want her to do that, I'd be thrilled with her being in missions. The harsh realities of not being able to see my grandkids grow up, the harsh realities of not being able to jump in and help at a moment's notice if something goes wrong. Those are very real, very difficult things that a parent has to wrestle with.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of parents wrestling with some of those issues, we're joined by our friends who are today, they're with ABWE, but we'll save that for a moment. Right now, they're just parents. And Dan and Amy, welcome to the show. We're not going to share too much about your last name, where you live, those sorts of things, because we want to be sensitive to the missionaries and the families that you serve and are connected with. But it's good to have you both on.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So you've walked through this. You have a child on the mission field. You have grandchildren on the mission field, far from home.
Our only grandchildren.
That's right.
It's not theoretical for you. It's real for you. Yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
So what was your reaction?
Well, really, initially, we felt blindsided, really, by the decision. And that as parents, we knew they wanted to go into ministry, and we knew they wanted to plant churches. And we knew they were looking at, and they even took us aside and said, don't worry, we're looking at the East Coast, because we don't want to be too far away from Mimi
East
and
Coast
Amy.
Of what country?
Mimi and Papa. And so that's what we figured. And so then when they came back and said, we've decided to be missionaries, and it's 10,000 miles away on the other side of the world in a Muslim country and a restricted country and a 12-hour time difference and our only grandkids, then yeah, we never saw that part coming. I mean, we had been always, active in the church, and kids had taken short-term missions trips to, different countries for different organizations and stuff. But the fact that they were planning on moving overseas for good, pretty much.
It was a shock.
Yeah, it was a shock. We didn't see that part coming.
We really kind of went through the stages of grief. Honestly, we started out with that whole denial. We just kept thinking, this cannot be happening. This isn't the way it was supposed to happen. And I thought you did this, you were following this path, and that quickly turned to some anger. There was some anger there, particularly with Dan. I think as a father, he wanted to protect his daughter and wanted to make sure that he was, she was cared for. And our only grandchild, how could they do that to us? We just, at the time, there was just the one.
And they're getting rid of stuff, as they're getting ready to move, they call on their ask, what stuff do you want back, or what do you want us to keep or give away? And it's like,
Dan was angry.
Yeah.
Dan said, I want it all.
the little basketball hoop and the gym and the bicycle. I want it all back.
But a few weeks later, you immediately just had a Jesus moment, and you had some sort of pious realization that it was all okay and they were serving the Lord, right?
That's not the way it happened.
Just
for
like
us.
a movie.
Not for us.
Just like the movie, just like a Kendrick Brothers movie. Right. What happened then?
We were just kind of felt like, under the water, and when a wave knocks you down, you're just floundering, trying to make sense of everything. And so there was intense sadness. We just, everything there. The day did come. They did get the funding. Things did come together. God did seem to help them, but we just were.
Think as a parent, you kind of think maybe that day won't come, and
it won't, but it did come.
You don't, not that you did not support them, but you didn't actively support them going because
we never said don't
what
go.
it meant.
Yeah.
Right.
But the day came, and so we were in the Chick-fil-A parking lot, in a
Where else?
local Chick-fil-A parking lot. Of course, that's where God's people go, right? So we said our goodbyes, and it was not a happy day. There were a lot of tears and a lot of last minute hugs and just sobbing and holding on to those sweet babies. And because our grandchildren, our only 2 grandchildren, were just at that age, barely 4 and not even 1. I mean, he was still an infant. And so we said our goodbyes and we got in the car and we drove 8 hours back home in total silence.
And they were going short term with the intention of staying longer term. So you knew what was coming, or was there still the hope that they're going to come back in 6 months to a year?
No, we knew that they were going to be gone
us?
for at least a year.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that was hard. And everything around us reminded us of them. You know, we'd be in a store and a child would call it for Papa or for a Mimi, or, you know, and that's what they called us. Or we would see something, a dent in the wall, and I would think, you know, I'd be cleaning and see this dent and I remember when he threw that car and made that dent, you know, just everything. And so we would try to reach out in our church. We were very active in our church and had great life group and things. And we would try to reach out to people, but it seemed that when we did that, people would try to say things that were helpful. But they weren't, and they really hurt. And that was really hard for us. You know, even some of our church leaders were dismissive and saying things like...
She met with some of the pastor.
Yeah. And one pastor said, well, this is what we raised him to do, right? And clapped us on the shoulder and walked on. And then,
after he prayed with her, he said, you know what you need to do? You need to work in the nursery and love on those other babies. And it's like, it's not...
That'll help. That hurts.
And he thought he was doing good.
He thought he was helping.
He thought he was loving you well by saying that. It wasn't received in that way, for sure.
It didn't feel
some
that
kid
way
in the
at the
nursery is
time.
not your grandchild.
Exactly.
No.
Exactly.
Sure.
So it's not that it was well-meaning. All of them were, but they didn't understand. And that became really obvious, is that we became desperate to find somebody who understood and could help us make sense of this and help us with this. Because ultimately what was happening was, when you hear things like, count it all joy, or your reward will be great in heaven, or you must be really proud of them. You're hearing these things. And so what it serves to do, though, is to admonish, or it did for us. It served as almost to admonish us. And so we learned to keep that to ourselves. So we learned not to really talk about it. So here we were going to church when we really should be able to open up about your struggles. But we've had the sense of that maybe we're not faithful enough. Are we not spiritual enough? Are we not walking in better sync with the Lord, that, you know, you start to question yourself. And it was a tough time. We had a period of months where it was really hard. You're sad and you're, you know, dealing with that too.
Did your kids know that you were struggling with this, or was this just something you had to keep to yourself? Were they processing it with you, or what did they know at this point?
They were in a country where communication was difficult. You have technology, but that technology doesn't always work. And so there's a lot of frozen features and things, but they knew that we were struggling with it. But I think that we did things probably very wrong because every time we tried to have a conversation, and we had set visits, you know, every Friday night was our Mimi Papa call, but it was very focused on those grandchildren. And we now know, you know, looking back on
Mimi
it.
Papa call, not the mom and dad call.
Exactly. It was not. And so we were just so desperate. We were so afraid these children were going to forget us, or that they wouldn't remember us because they were so young, that we were so desperate to try to catch them on the phone and to try to hear their little voices, or to make sure they saw us, or show them little things, and stand in our head doing all the crazy things grandparents do anyway with their grandchildren, that we really kind of didn't talk to our kids. And they were, so they knew that we were struggling. They knew that we were sad because it was very hard. I would say things on there like, oh my goodness, he's starting to forget, you know, and so they knew that there was a lot of sadness. Yes, they knew that, but we didn't really talk about it a lot.
So how did God lead to support you? What happened in your life? Because obviously you're not in the same place today that you were then. What did God do?
So that's where Amy's librarian skills
Yeah, that's right.
took over.
I was a school librarian and preached research all the time. So not feeling that I could get support from our church, and we did search scriptures and things, but and songs and things like that. But I began to research just anything I could think of to find resources for parents of missionaries. And there was a lot for parenting for missionary parents, how to parent and things like that. There was virtually nothing. There is one book, and it's a wonderful book, but there is basically just one resource for parents of missionaries. I went through all these different missions agencies, different support, trying to find some help, someone who had walked this road and could help us through this. So finally, after months, literally months of searching, I found, very much by accident, a very little gathering, and that person said, don't forget there's going to be a Parents of Missionaries retreat in January, and we still have a few more spots open. And I was at home alone.
Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, we had to go to Dallas, Texas. But I was home alone. I remember when Dan came home, I just about jumped on him and just like, oh my gosh, I found out there's a retreat. There's a retreat for parents of missionaries. We've got to go. I've got to go. Please let me go. Because in my head, I was thinking this was several states away. It's halfway across the country. This is going to involve airfare. This is going to involve a hotel. This is going to involve meals. And I didn't know he's very much the budget conscious husband. I thought, what's he going to say? And actually, what did you say?
Yeah, first thing I said was, can I go too?
And so we did. We found this place. It was a very small gathering. It wasn't very big. But I'm telling you, Scott, God did a miracle in our hearts. There's no other way to say it. It opened with the man. Well, I have to back up and say, in the car before, we held hands, and I said, God, please, we prayed, God, please let us find someone like us. And it was quick. It was just a quick prayer. Let there be somebody like us. And when we walked in, I immediately sat down and checked my phone, of course. And we heard this voice say, can I sit down? And it was a woman. And she had brown hair like me. She was wearing the same color as me. She had little glasses on.
This is why people should be watching on YouTube, not just listening, so they can see it and get the idea.
That's right. But she said, can we sit here? I said, of course. And then the man said, do you have kids? Oh, yeah, we have 3 daughters. Oh, we have 3 daughters too. And I said, great. Well, and the man said, so is your daughter who's there? Yes, it's our oldest. Oh, it's our oldest too. Well, it wouldn't be so bad, the man said, if they hadn't taken our only 2 grandchildren, and they were the same ages and everything. It was just like God answered that prayer immediately. And it was so cool. And then the leader, who was the man who was leading, the couple who was leading, stood up and he said, welcome. I just want to welcome everyone. Welcome to where everybody in this room understands the ache.
Right. And that's the first time we actually been with people that understood, walked what we walked and had been through it. Because even in church, you sit there in church and they flash the missionaries up on the screen and you see them, but until it's your own child.
Yeah.
We supported missions. We supported missions. We supported missionaries. We went on things. But, when it's your child, that changes things. Yeah. And your grandchildren, you just think this isn't the way it's supposed to be. It's not, you don't think about that. People so many times tell us now, well, I never really thought about that. Yeah, and I never did either.
So what did that reconciliation process then with your daughter and son-in-law look like once you had come to more of a realization, you had more of that support from people that also felt the ache? How did you reconnect and get on the same page? It
was immediately. That weekend was just an incredibly intensive emotional weekend where God just melted so much of the hurt and the fears and the anger and just really dealt with us. And those people, they hugged us and prayed with us and introduced us to scriptures. And we realized that we weren't just grieving the loss of our sweet family members. We were grieving really the loss of our identities and how we thought our lives were supposed to look. And the anger that we felt, particularly at our son-in-law, honestly, that was misdirected too, because it came down to, we had to admit that we had some anger with God. Why our child, And so that reconciliation happened at the end of that weekend. Our daughter kept texting us, how's it going? Got to talk to you. Call us when you can talk. We can't wait to hear about it. And I was ignoring it. And Dan finally said, Amy, you've got to call her. And so I picked up the phone and called and I said, I need to tell you, honey, that this weekend has been amazing, but I can't tell you all about it right now. It's just too raw. Yeah. And I said, but the one thing I do have to make sure you know is how sorry I am that we didn't support you. I mean, we had never not supported. We had never said, don't go. We had never said we're against this, but we had not supported. And I said her name and I said, what if the honest truth is, I wish that you were here. I still want you here. I want all of you here. But if you believe that God has called you to be there, and this is where you're supposed to be, then we are not going to do anything to make that difficult for you. And it just, we wept and we cried, and it was just a real sweet, tender moment. And, we've had conversations since then that with more of that. But at that moment, we actually found out that was a month before COVID. That was actually January of 2020 when that happened. And she said, "Are you sitting down? Because I need to tell you something." And I thought, oh, wow, this is where it's going to get real. This is where it's going to be, I was fully expecting her to say, she said, "We're supposed to come home this summer, right?" And I said, "Right." And I was just steeling myself because it's like, she's going to tell us that she's going to be there longer. She said, "We've been talking to ABWE and they've decided, Mom, they're going to bring us home next month. We're going to be home next month." And I didn't cry and I didn't react. I just kind of, because in my mind, instantly, I saw like all those Sunday school images of Abraham about to sacrifice Isaac, because instantly I knew that God was speaking to my heart saying, I just needed you to let go. You were holding on so tight. And the minute you could let go and say, there they are and they're yours. And I just felt like he rewarded that obedience and that willingness to just finally let go of that.
Right.
And maybe he knew that I couldn't handle it because they came home 1 week before they shut down everything. Yeah. It was just a week or two before.
Wow.
And then as far, we were even in the hotel room there, we were thinking, why isn't anybody else doing this? Why do we have to come all the way to Texas for this little group of 12
or 15
couples?
Wow, very small.
Why isn't this going on everywhere?
And Dan said to me, he said, "Well, what do you think we could do?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "But I do things, I'm not afraid of speaking in front of people, and you're a professor." And then we just kind of went to sleep and went back to life and didn't know how God, but we knew that there was something. We just had this burning desire to help other people walk over this bridge. If you think about a great ravine in the cartoons or something, you can't get over here. You're in a pit and you just can't get out, or whatever illustration, but that you can help other people, that they need that help. And there's just that, this can't be the only place. This, there's such a need there. Yeah. So
you shared a little bit about some of the less helpful advice you received from people who just were well-meaning, but just kind of ignorant of what you were dealing with. But looking back now, what were some of the things that were helpful, and what kind of advice are you giving to people based on some of the things that were actually helpful? Because as a pastor, I'm thinking about that. As we have parents that are dealing with that, what are the kinds of things that I could say to them that actually would encourage them and not just add on to the discouragement?
Yeah. I think it's okay to say, "Man, that stinks." That's got to be hard. I think we tend to want to fix it, and we tend to want to say the Sunday school answers or make somebody feel better quick. And so I think sometimes it's okay to just put your arms around somebody and just say, right now they need to hear that. That's one part of it.
They're grieving. They need somebody to listen at the moment. They're not to solve the problem and give them as a Christian, you should be so proud. At the moment when they first tell you as a parent,
the best advice, honestly, the best counsel we got, though, was from a speaker that was there in Texas. It was just one little short segment, but he used an illustration and talked about the different areas. That this is like moving to a new house. It's like this new life that we didn't necessarily want to go to, but we are in this new house now. And so you have this new home, and that you're visiting these other areas that are not so pleasant. You're visiting this area of sadness, like a swamp of sadness. You're visiting this desolate desert and that desert of loneliness. You're visiting sometimes the volcano, anger volcano. And you can visit all these places, and fearful forest, a forest of fears. And you picture all these different landscapes and different places, and you're going to be there. You're going to visit sadness. You're going to visit, and it's not going to end. And it still doesn't end. There are still times we get sad, but we don't live there. Yeah. We live in this is our home. This is our new house, and we have a home.
You're still going to be sad. You're still going to get angry, but
we don't live there. And so there have been many times where we remind each other that, we can still feel sad, and we can still get mad at something that doesn't feel fair, but we don't live there, and we don't get stuck there anymore. And God has really just driven that home to us that He is here. And he is going to get us through these different areas that we visit, but our home is here, and this is where we are, and God is there.
Well, one of the more, I don't want to say concerning parts of your story, but it is a little bit surprising that there isn't more for parents walking through this. And so bringing the story full circle, you probably never thought on that day that you found out that your children and grandchildren were going to go serve with ABWE overseas long term, because they've since gone back too. They came back. They're back long term. You probably never thought, hey, I think we'll sign up to work with ABWE as well. So how did God open that door, and what are you doing now? What is your ministry? How are you trying to help other people in your shoes?
Yeah.
Well, I think when they first came back, they debriefed with member care and told them the story on how we really struggled and we were grieving.
And how that affected them.
And how that affected them on the field.
Sure, yeah.
Right. And so
then, our daughter said, there's someone in member care who wants to talk to you and see what that was like, what it was like for your end, because I told him what it was like for our end, from our perspective. And so I said, oh, well, okay. So we had that conversation, and then that person asked if we would come out and come to a 24-hour demo.
Actually came to a 24-hour demo, and we're actually at the 24-hour demo, and they've got the breakout sessions for all the different areas, and we're like,
and
why are we here again?
Dan said, what are we doing here? So we had that conversation. We actually had several hours of conversations, and basically it ended up with them saying, how would you feel about helping us start a ministry to parents and missionaries? And, I was just grabbed the arms of the chair. I was like, yes. And of course, before I said yes, I had my mouth ready and looked over at Dan, and Dan said, I'm not moving to Pennsylvania. So
it's okay-ish here.
So that's kind of how it started.
It's a beautiful state, but
it is. We prefer ours though. Our state. But it has been, so I did leave my career. I felt like it was at a good time to do so. I loved it for many, many years being a school librarian, but I felt like this needed the time and attention of at least one of us full time to really dedicate to spending time and learning how to create a ministry that's going to be effective, that will last. And we were advised to make sure that we do it correctly so that it's not a flash in the pan kind of thing. So so that's where we are.
So if someone's with ABWE, or I'm just going to go out on a limb, even if they're not with ABWE, but they're hungering for this, what would be the best way to connect with you guys?
We have a very easy email, parentsofmissionaries@abwe.org. And so that is the best way.
At abwe.org. Scott, I want to give you a chance to cut in as well before we wrap up with these two, because there's so much that we could get into, but we're really just scratching the surface, because we want people to hear your story. But then what they're going to need is more than just a podcast. What so many people in that season are going to need is the personal connection.
Absolutely.
And the resources that you would provide. But Scott, do you want to hop in?
No, I really appreciate what you're doing. You and I talked to my parents, I don't know, a couple years ago, Alex and
Bruce and Debbie.
You remember their names. That's good. It's my mom's birthday coming up, so that's a good time.
Happy birthday, Debbie.
Yeah.
We know you're listening.
Yeah, maybe she might be. I don't know. But just in talking to them, and their experience was different than yours. I mean, they walked through different things, but every single parent that is sending kids overseas, or even sometimes to other states, depending on your family makeup, different families have different kind of risk tolerances and are used to different kind of things. But everyone's going through that loss, and to be able to share that with people, I'm so thankful for what God's calling you to do, because I think there's a huge need. And I think actually, in my experience with mobilization, Alex can probably affirm this, is like the number one thing that holds young people back from going into missions is parents who are not willing to let them go. Yeah. And I talked to many, many young people who wanted to go into missions until they talked to mom and dad.
That's right. There's also, we did find out too, that one of the top 3 reasons missionaries leave the field is because of family relationships, which would include obviously the parents.
That makes sense.
And just to follow up this other question.
Think of the guy we met at ME conference who has been a missionary for 20 years with ABWE. And I mean, he sat there at the table and cried and said, his parents his dad still can't talk about it in church when they ask him to speak. And he's like, man, I wish you were there 20 years ago.
Wow. And just to follow up, when you said, what advice would you offer? You asked that a while ago. Yeah. And I think to missionaries, first of all, refer them to Parents and Missionaries, and they can write to us, Parents and Missionaries at ABWE.org, but to let them know the resources. We have monthly Zoom calls that we're doing with families. We are planning right now retreats that will start next year in different places in the country, so that it won't be all in one place. Not just Dallas.
Not just Dallas.
And so we're excited about those things that are happening. But to please remember this. This is so important. We were meeting some very sweet people when they come for new missionary orientations. And there was a woman who said, our family lives in Iowa and their parents live in North Carolina. Her parents live in North Carolina. She said, and we don't see each other that often anyway. So I just don't understand why my mom is so upset. And I just smiled and I hugged her and I said, there's a couple of things. One, your mom knows she could get to you if she needed to. And that changes when you go overseas. Yep. It's not that simple. I said, the other thing is, I said, are you sure God told you? Oh, yeah. Where are you going? And she named a place. And I said, and you feel like God really wants? Oh, yes. And I said, that fire you're feeling in your belly and the excitement you feel, that calling that you're doing, your parents don't have that. Yeah. And so give them some grace, give them some time. We can't, it's okay to say, how are you feeling about this, Mom? How are you feeling about this, Dad? Tell me what you're worried about. It's okay to have those tough conversations. They may not be forthcoming immediately, and you brought up a good point, because not everybody has the same situation. Not everybody goes kicking and screaming and crying.
Not everyone has believing parents either.
That's right. Absolutely. But all of us go through a range of emotions, and they're complicated by the fact that we're fumbling around in the dark trying to find each other. Military people have support groups that can help other military, and missionaries can network with other missionaries through their organization. But for the parents, they're like this forgotten, kind of quiet, invisible group that you don't know or you can't find. And there's probably not more than one, maybe 2 or 3 in your church if you're in a big church. But so finding each other is such a big deal. And it's important that we make those connections and being able to connect POMs to other POMs.
POMs.
Yep.
We're going to make that acronym great, just like PK, MK, POMs. We
call our group POM Life, that we meet on our Zoom meetings. And then we have a Facebook group.
Could I suggest pom-poms?
I thought about that, but then there's a whole cheerleader group that I don't know that we would. It might be complicated.
You got bigger than you wanted to get. It is too much enthusiasm. Yeah,
that's right.
That makes sense.
Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Amy, so much for being here and sharing your story, really bearing all. And we encourage you as well. If you or someone you know needs this, Parents of Missionaries at abwe.org. Again, that's Parents of Missionaries at abwe.org to learn more about what ABWE does in terms of member care in general, care for the souls and the families of our missionaries. abwe.org/member care will take you exactly where you need to be. Well, speaking of resources, the Missions Podcast is a ministry of ABWE as well. To get more content, go to missionspodcast.com. Please, before you go, share this with a friend, subscribe, rate, review, do all those wonderful things that help this appear in the feeds of other people that can be blessed by this type of content. And if the Lord would put on your heart to partner with us in this ministry, you can go to missionspodcast.com/support. Well, until next week's show, thank you for watching or listening, however you join us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.